We've seen a lot of changes in how the launch vehicles have been upgraded, and the talk over here is an example of how the range is starting to upgrade its hardware. How are you handling everything as far as upgrading the paperwork to try to make this much more smooth as far as changing over to an operational, as far as range responsiveness, both to the government users as well as commercial users?
Well, let me start out by saying one of the features of the whole process of modernization is to build into the systems some of those responsibility and operability things that will make this thing much more operational in character. And we're working very closely with the Space Command as the requirements generator of that to find the money to put in the budget to make all those things happening. So a lot of what you see here today, this building is a good example of that. The facilities that are going up on the Cape for a new solid rocket motor processing facility, a Centaur processing facility. The modernization of the pads that's going on is taking into consideration a lot of those kind of features where we're bringing new types of equipment into the inventory so that the operators can bring their procedures and people online and be responsive in our launch. Tom?
My part of that action is really providing that operational advocacy that General Cromer mentioned. In our system, having an operational command advocate improvements is the way we do things in the airplane business. I think well, for my agenda, as I mentioned in my speech, the infrastructure improvements are going to be very, very high on our priority list. And I think there's an appreciation in the building of the need to put some investment into Patrick as well as Vandenberg, and that will be very high on my list, and I intend to be back in the building stumping for that.
I don't know which other of you gentlemen want to address both of these questions, because I've got two of them. The first one has to do with DoD shuttle flights. The next one that you guys have up is Atlantis, which now you're looking at early November. After that one, how many more classified shuttle flights are on the books in the next couple of years, and about how many of those are you looking at trying to do in each year? The other question has to do with the Titan IV program. I know both of you gentlemen, I am sure, are familiar with the attempts and the discussions that have been going underway down here between members of us, the media, and members of the Air Force to try to get a situation where at least the launch times of these flights aren't classified, because we quite frankly don't see the need for it. If you could address both of those questions, and the second one, just tell us where everything is at in reviewing this policy with the media.
As far as the DoD shuttle launches, the next one is a full classified DoD shuttle launch as we have in the past. After that, it winds down. We have an unclassified launch with STS-44. We are at that point then getting out of the secure mode operations with NASA, and subsequent flights will be basically not classified as DoD per se, although there may be subsequent DoD missions which some features of those will have classified activities associated with them, but not to the extent of the launches that we've seen in the past and up through the next one. So we're getting ourselves out of it, mainly because our missions on the shuttle are going way down in terms of scope, and that is we'll probably fly on the order of one every year to 2 years in the future on those. Insofar as the Titan IV launch classification policy, yes, we have had that under advisement. We've been iterating policy changes, and those are in work. And when we get through that process, I expect to see some change, but I'm not going to second guess Mr. Fag on what that conclusion is today.
When might that change be,
I think we can expect probably within the next 6 months that that'll get concluded, and we'll establish a new policy on it.
Would it be favorable towards what we want, or?
I don't know what you want.
I
mean, you guys ask for a lot of things. So some of it you're going to like, and some of it you're not going to like, would be my answer.
General, following up to John's question for the DoD launches, can we expect that for 44 on, they'll basically be treated as other NASA launches where we'll get an actual launch window as opposed to launch period, and general information other than what specifically does have to be classified will be revealed?
I think for the purposes of your interface with the shuttle and the activities of the launch, it'll be like the NASA launches. The characteristic and nature of the payloads and what happens with those payloads on orbit, if they're classified, will not be divulged.
I'm Beth Dickey with Reuters. Just a couple of questions on rationale. The first one regarding DoD shuttle launches is your decision to cut down your number of shuttle launches directly related to the fact that you've got the Titan IV now, or has NASA had some responsibility in that, in asking you to put more of your payloads on Titan IVs and open up the shuttle launches that you do fly to the public?
Well, I wouldn't say it exactly the way you said it. I think the fact that we don't have as many payloads on the shuttle is a reflection of the fact that as a consequence of the accidents that we had, the Challenger and Titan accidents, there is a tremendous backlog, and there was a need on the part of the Defense Department to have another means to space and not be totally dependent upon the shuttle. NASA, in my previous life, I used to do the manifesting. And NASA is very pleased with the fact that we have alternative means to space, because they also have a significant science and technology payload backlog themselves. But I wouldn't, as I say, I wouldn't characterize it quite the way your question did, but I think it's mutually beneficial that we have alternative means to space.
Okay, and for either of you, the second question is the rationale regarding the switch of commands for Air Force space launches. I'm curious why it's taken 33 years to do that. Is this a decision by the Air Force management to do this as a way to get more federal budget money, or is this just something that should have been done 15 years ago and we've been putting it off?
Well, to answer that question, you have to put it in historical perspective. There was no alternative to Air Force Systems Command for the first about 22 years of our space program. Air Force Space Command did not exist prior to September 1982. It was a young command in '82 that had lots of new things on their plate. And although there were people in the Air Force leadership who thought that ultimately space launch should be transferred to an operational command, it was not felt that that was the appropriate time. So what you see now is 8 years past, a belief now that the command has matured to the point to accept the responsibility, and secondly, a belief that the advocacy provided by an operational command was what was needed to improve and modernize our launch systems and launch infrastructure. So to me, it's kind of a natural historical evolution.
Yeah, let me fill in a little bit on the historical perspective by reminding you also that in 1982, when we stood up the Air Force Space Command, the first thing we did transfer was operational on-orbit control of those operational systems. We were in the process of bringing online the Space Operations Control Center at Falcon, getting a new command to take on that mission and getting them postured and stood up to be able to handle that took time, and to divert that young command's attention to taking on too much at once, it was something we consciously decided we would delay. Now that's pretty much along the way, and we're taking the next logical step as we're bringing more and more operational kind of systems in, and we'll bring it along as we talked about in the answer to the first question.
Gentlemen, I'm Jim Banky with Florida Today. First question dealing with range resources. It's come up again in the last few weeks here where we've had a Titan IV and then we've had shuttle and going back and forth. And if Delta doesn't get off, and now we go into the countdown. Until this facility is fully up and operational, General, from the perspective of Space Command, what is the priority from your view in terms of how you're handling range priority, military, commercial, NASA?
And let General Cromer jump in on this as well. But my sense is the priority doesn't fundamentally change from where it is now. we end up having a list of priority missions, and they end up being a product of a lot of different factors. And there's a constant trade-off as to range resources, pad turnarounds, age equipment. All those things factor in, and the objective always is to see that we can maximize the available resource. And there are trade-offs, and I'm committed to trying to keep that prioritization process at the lowest possible level. And I would rather not to give you an hierarchical basis, because it varies depending upon the situation.
Just to add to that, to remind you that the Eastern Test Range, this whole capability down here is a national resource. It's here to serve a variety of customers, including not only the Air Force,
Navy,
but DoD-wide, the Navy, civil space, and commercial space. And so the operation we have developed over the years to keep the decision process here, sort out the priorities with the real-time information at hand, depending on the vagaries of weather, equipment status, hardware, and people, is exactly the right answer, and we'll continue to prosecute it that way.
Okay, and a second question, you mentioned the infrastructure was the first priority. When does it come time for new launch vehicles? And will you specify a need, and then, General, will you develop the booster? How does that work, and when will you need to do it? And in that answer, what's the status of Advanced Launch System?
Okay. For my money, as the operator and the advocator, I believe we're past time for an advanced launch system. I am a big proponent of the advanced launch system. And you're quite right. We will be the advocate, and General Cromer's Space Systems Division will run the SPO. And in that particular case, it is a national program, and it's jointly managed by NASA and the Air Force. The Advanced Launch Development Program is the result really of budget constraints. We had a full-up program, hopefully to fly a system in this decade about a year and a half ago. As a result of budget cuts, we have now focused the program on developing a prototype engine that would have initial firing somewhere about the 97 kind of time frame, because that indeed is the long pole in the technology tent. I think that the Air Force is committed to pursuing that, and I think there is a recognition that we have to go to a more operable system than what we have now. But that's a long-term process, developing one. It is not something that you can anticipate in the next few years.
And what the whole focus of the Advanced Launch System is not a big heavy lift vehicle as people would like to characterize it. That's the way it might have started out when it was sponsored under SDI. But now the concept is it's a family of launch vehicles. That is basically the next generation of vehicles to replace all of our current inventory eventually. I remind you that that current inventory is based on ICBM technology of the 1950s and 1960s, which we have modernized and improved, and will have to carry us through the turn of the century with today's budget and forecast. But this program is bringing along not only new technology, but it's bringing along a lot of the operability features that will make it a true responsive launch vehicle, including high reliability, including things like engine out capability. We're going to try to remove the activities off of the launch pad, which is analogous to the end of the runway, and get them back into the hangar, so that when we get out to the end of the runway, we're going to take off on time and on schedule. And that's the whole thrust of that program.
I'm Harry Colcom with Aviation Week. And General Moorman, can you give us a rough, or General Cromer, a rough idea of the existing backlog that remains from the downtimes that we've experienced?
I don't have a number right off the top of my head, do you?
No, we're still yet to launch the Discus satellite. It's been sitting on the ground since the shuttle was grounded. The first launch of that will take place sometime next spring. We are still manifested and now at a rate which is going to, I think, by another year or so, pretty much start buying or building us out of that backlog and getting on with the new system. So I think we've got about one more year to start into it. We'll still have a backlog of Discus and other specific programs, but by and large, I think we've hit the steady state point on the launch capacity with our current inventory.
Well, are you satisfied with the progress of Titan IV? It just seems like there have not been as many development
You've got to
launches.
remember with the Titan IV that we are modernizing and changing over the launch pad infrastructure along with getting the systems flying as we can bring them online. Titan IV is just not a class of vehicles. There are 4 or 5 different classes of Titan IV vehicles depending on which upper stage you put on which booster, which coast you fly it out of, which pad you fly it out of, and what kind of shroud you put on it. So we are stepwise walking into the Titan IV program. It will not be until 1993 when the total Titan IV program will have finished all of its changeover, and that's the period of time that we've targeted when we will take the Titan launch group down here, move them out of our combined test force, and make them an operational squadron as we did with the Delta Squadron today.
One more question. Could you just generally tell us what the contribution of Air Force space is in the current situation in the Middle East? Is it related strictly to GPS, or are you using some?
I can talk in general terms to that. No, it is not just GPS. Although GPS, as you might imagine, in an environment such as Southwest Asia, sand dunes, no distinguishable features. The maps don't have a lot of things that our ground troops can go on. As a consequence, we have worked very hard with the Army, particularly Army Space Command, to get as many receivers as possible into theater so they can take advantage of the existing constellation of GPS satellites. But that is proving to be an extraordinarily valuable space resource, and the troops over there are crying for additional receivers. Yeah, I'm going to talk about weather and comm. Let's talk about the weather satellite, DMSP. The Arabian Peninsula, at this time of year, although the weather is improving slightly, the newspapers or television emphasizes the heat over there. But for military operations, a major factor in addition to the heat is the fact that you have sandstorms frequently in the Arabian Peninsula. The DMSP satellite, because it provides very high resolution weather, does a very good job of pinpointing that. And for both ground, air operations, it's really important to be able to characterize that. So we have a DMSP receive capability in theater that's getting that data directly. As far as comm, as you might gather, we're using a good percentage of the resource of the 2 Discus satellites that are in view over there. And satellite communications is again proving its worth as it did in Just Cause. So space systems are playing a very important role, and of course they were the first forces on the scene, if you will, before we got over there, and are a place where space systems, or Saudi Arabia is a place where space systems can really be a force multiplier.
We're going to give Sue an opportunity to ask the last question.
I'm Sue Butler, Time Magazine and Daytona Beach News Journal, and Harry Holcomb just asked my question about the Middle East.
Well, then I've got one last one. Yeah. John, I want to go back to shuttle for a second. You had said that STS 44 would be an unclassified flight, and you had said that other shuttle missions after that you folks in DoD would maybe be having some usage for, but would not. A lot of those uses would not necessarily be classified. Could you give us a couple of examples of 44? I think is the Star Lab mission. Is that the SDI Star? No.
That's payload mission.
Oh, okay. If you could just give us some examples as to what some of those other payloads might be that would be on future flights that wouldn't be classified that we could all write and talk about.
Let me give you a good example. It's called STS-39. It's a mission that we've been trying to fly on the shuttle since before the first Vandenberg shuttle was to launch. And we have a series of experiments called the 675 experiment, which is an IR background radiation monitoring experiment. We have an experiment similar to that is flying for SDI to gather phenomenology of auroral data and stuff like that. And then a third one is a pallet across the bay that has a number of other sensors on it to look at ozone impingement and proximity operations with the shuttle, looking at hard body and various experiments there. That is typical of the kind of use that the DoD sees of the shuttle, and that is where you need man on board to do interactive experimental work and fly it that way. So it'll be that kind of a mission. We have a Starlab experiment coming up with the shuttle in coordination with SDI that'll fly sometime in the future. And then where we have experimental type satellite missions where we only need a partial ride in a shuttle bay where it's advantageous to both NASA and us to mix that cargo, we'll put them on there and fly them. It'll be of that nature, but no dedicated missions except for very few that might come up in the future.
Since 44 is unclassified now, can you tell us some details of details in the date, what the arrangements and things like that mission?
No, I will not comment to that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.